Welcome, thanks for being here, and today we're going to talk about how to make your own tempeh. If this is your first time watching our videos, hi, I'm Val. I made the recipe website Very Vegan Val. Thank you so much for being here, or thank you so much for coming back. If you're not so familiar with what exactly tempeh is a vegan protein source that is commonly eaten in Indonesia. It's made by growing molds in with soybeans so that they create a block or sort of like cake shape. And of course, it's not just any mold. We inoculate it with the type of mold we want to grow. So then instead of having loose soybeans, you have sort of a cake of soybeans that you can cut, chop, fry, stew, whatever it is you like to do with your vegan protein sources. Now, of course, tofu is also made from soybeans, but compared to tofu, tempeh has whole beans, it has a nutty flavor and a much more fermented, interesting flavor, whereas tofu is kind of blander and has a spongy texture. When you're making your own tempeh, do your best to make sure that everything you use has been cleaned and sanitized to risk any chance of harmful molds getting into your tempeh. And if you are ever not sure if something looks off, it is better to do without than to get yourself sick. So the thing about making your own tempeh is it is just wildly better than store-bought tempeh. I actually used to think I didn't really like tempeh that much until I started making my own, and now I'm a huge fan. It has a much more tender texture and just more dynamic, nutty, interesting flavors. The best part about it to me is that you're not limited by what's available in the store, which is almost always just a soybean tempeh. You can make tempeh with any bean, as well as different nuts, grains, seeds, etc. And we're gonna walk through how to do that today. So the common narrative is that you could make tempeh with anything, and that's true and it's not true. So I went through my pantry and just grabbed a bunch of seeds and grains and beans that I have, and we can talk about why they would or would not work well for tempeh. We're gonna start off with soybeans. These are sort of the classic tempeh bean, and naturally they do work well. One thing you have to keep in mind though is they have a pretty thick outer hull which needs to be removed before making tempeh. The same is true of chickpeas. Most recipes have you do it by hand by soaking your beans and then rubbing off the hulls manually. I've not tried this with soybeans, but with chickpeas, I've tried doing it where you just boil with a little bit of baking soda and the hulls kind of dissolved, and it worked really well with chickpeas. These red beans are a great option for tempeh. They're a medium-sized bean, they cook up uniformly, and they don't have a very thick hull, so you don't need to remove that. These lima beans, on the other hand, might give you some trouble. Ideally, you don't want this much space between your beans, so if you want to make a tempeh with a really large bean, I recommend mixing something else in, just so the mycelium doesn't have to fill that much of a gap between your beans. Flax, on the other hand, gives you the opposite issue. Now, this is flax meal, so that's a whole nother issue, but we're gonna pretend it's flax seeds. The problem with flax seeds, and the same goes with chia seeds and teff and quinoa, is that they are so small that they will densely pack together and not leave enough room for mycelium to grow in between them. Because of that, you could use a small amount of flaxseed or chia seed or quinoa or teff in your tempeh, but I would not recommend making it just from one of those seeds. Rice is another great option to add to a tempeh. You will probably have the same issue as I have with teff or flax seed in that it is very small, so it is finely packed, but it makes a great partial ingredient in a tempeh. Here we have two lentils. One will work well, one will not. These whole brown lentils will work nicely in a tempeh. You just need to make sure not to overcook them. These split red lentils, on the other hand, are going to be mushy kind of no matter how little you cook them. I do not recommend using split lentils or split beans in general in a tempeh. For the same reason, I do not recommend using canned beans in a tempeh. They just are not firm enough to give you a good tempeh. So, how do you get the right firmness for a good tempeh? Let's talk about that next. It is best practice to soak your beans before cooking them. Honestly, I don't. You should, but I don't, and I don't really have issues with it. You want a bean that is cooked but not mushy, and there's a pretty small window for that. So in order to get a bean that is cooked but not mushy, you need to make sure to check them frequently. Don't cook them as long as you think they should. Also make sure that there's no raw bite. The other thing you can do that can help is work with ingredients that don't really need to be cooked. Consider adding some seeds or some nuts to your tempeh, which will allow you to have that little bit of space in between without the mushiness, and that'll just help you out in general. Now that we've got our beans sorted, let's talk cultures. Tempeh only has 3 needed ingredients: your beans or other grain or seed, a small amount of vinegar, which will lower the pH and make it safer for fermentation, and a little bit of a tempeh culture. I keep mine in the freezer, which gives it a very long shelf life. The tempeh culture I'm using is called Reprima. Now, not every tempeh culture is the same. The first tempeh culture I ever got filled the house with this very pungent aroma. I think the best way to put it is it may have been an acquired taste, and it was not a taste that I had acquired. So it was very strong and a bit sort of rotten tasting. You know, I'm sure it is delicious to some people, but it is definitely not a flavor that I was prepared for. So if you were looking for a good, mild, nutty tempeh culture, this Reprima culture has worked very, very well for me. The next step in our tempeh making is just going to be to mix our ingredients together. We're going to start with our beans. You want them cooked, cooled, and dry. So for one batch of tempeh, you're going to use 1 pound of dried beans. For every batch of tempeh, I use a 1:1:1 formula, and all of those ones are different things, so it's not really that helpful. But I use 1 pound of dried beans. That's the same as about 6 cups of cooked beans. To that, we're going to add 1 tablespoon of distilled white vinegar and 1 teaspoon of our tempeh culture starter. Sprinkle it on top and then stir or toss to coat everything. Something like that. Now, traditionally, tempeh is fermented in banana leaves. If you have access to banana leaves, I'm pretty sure what you do is you just stick them in the leaves and wrap it up like a little package, but I do not have access to banana leaves. So we're going to mimic the qualities that we want using things that I do have access to. So what we're looking for is something that will hold in hydration while still allowing for a little bit of airflow. We also want something that's going to give our tempeh a nice shape to grow into. So this is my solution. A gallon Ziploc bag. This one is used but washed and clean, I assure you. Now you might be thinking, Valerie, there's not a whole lot of airflow in a Ziploc bag. In fact, being airtight is sort of one of the things they're known for, and you're right. So we're going to have to make some modifications. I have always found using a cooling rack to be the easiest way to do this. And what we're just going to do is every inch or so, make a puncture. You're just going to puncture through both layers of plastic, about every inch. It doesn't need to be precise at all. You just want to make sure that there is plenty of places where the air can come in. Because the mold that is tempeh is in fact a mold, needs air. I will also reuse these multiple times. You just need to mark that it's the tempeh bag. Otherwise, other things you start putting in it end up falling out, or, you know, it's just not. Mark your tempeh bags. Now that we've got our bag set up, we will fill it with our beans. Another key part in making tempeh is thinking about the thickness. The mycelium will get too hot and will not survive if your tempeh is too thick. So about an inch thick is ideal. A little bit less is also fine. Just go ahead and spread your beans out as much as possible. I'm going to transfer mine onto this dehydrating rack because, as you might have noticed in the beginning, there is a guest in my kitchen. This teeny tiny friend is my dehydrator. I'm looking at it on camera and I don't feel like it really expresses to you how gigantic this machine is. And it usually lives in my basement because hours and hours and hours of it running will drive you insane. But for you and for this video, I brought it upstairs and I might go insane. Now, a food dehydrator might not be your natural choice for something that you want to keep moist, but because we put our beans in plastic, it will be fine. You also don't need a dehydrator to make tempeh. What you need is something that will stay in a range of about 85 to 90 degrees. Another option is an Instant Pot on the yogurt setting that is pretty much right in the range. Some people use the oven with a light on. I have not tested that and cannot confirm that it's warm enough. They do it though, so it seems like it probably would be. Okay, so the lowest setting on my dehydrator is 90 degrees, which is just about as hot as you want to get. Look at that vintage plastic. Tempeh takes about 2 days to make, but as the tempeh ferments, it will start producing heat. So once your tempeh is producing its own heat, you may want to reduce the temperature. What I've found works really well for me in this food dehydrator is to set it at 90 degrees for the first 12 to 24 hours, usually 24 hours, and then to turn off the heat, but leave it in the dehydrator for the next 1 and sometimes even 2 days. I found that the tempeh will make enough heat to sustain itself in this confined, insulated setting on the second day. For now, we're just gonna turn it on and we'll check it in about 12 hours. This is my life now. That's looking great. It's been about 20 hours and you can see there is plenty of growth there. It's actually looking pretty close to done. You can also feel that there is heat coming off of it. It's warmer than like the walls of the dehydrator. So, time to close it off and just let it finish going. I usually would leave it for another day, but honestly, this is progressing really, really nicely. I might just leave it for another 12 hours. We'll see. Our gorgeous tempeh is done. I have never had a tempeh set up quite so fast for me. This was done probably before 24 hours. I did let it go another 12 or so hours, and you can see throughout the surface of the tempeh some darker spots. That is actually where the mold has started to spread its spores, which means it's gone a little bit past the ideal tempeh stage. It is still very much edible, and you don't need to worry about it. Now, of course, we have to taste our tempeh. And my favorite way to do that is to simply fry a thin slice in a little bit of oil and get it nice and crispy. It's just so delicious that way. So we're gonna do that right now. Now, I will often add some soy sauce to this as well, but I'm not even gonna do that today. I'll just add a little sprinkle of salt and we'll call it a day. This might be my favorite tempeh that I've made. I'm not sure why it turned out so amazingly, because I've made black bean tempeh before, but this is somehow a little bit extra special. It has such a delicate crispiness on the outside, and the inside is very soft, has this beautiful light black bean flavor, and as you chew, you get hit with the nuttiness of the tempeh at the end. Wow, this is a good tempeh. I'm glad I made a large batch of it, so we'll have several meals to come. And of course, the amazing thing is you can turn pretty much any combination of nuts, beans, seeds, and grains into a tempeh. There are so many amazing flavor combinations out there to try. If you're looking for a simple starter tempeh, I do recommend a black bean tempeh or a black-eyed pea tempeh. Those are two of my favorites. Now, once your tempehs are done and you want to store them, you're going to put them in an airtight container or Ziploc bag in the fridge. If you're not planning on eating it within the next few days to maybe a week, you can freeze them. They freeze and defrost really, really nicely. If you have a vacuum sealer, that can actually help ensure it lives even a little bit longer in your freezer. Thank you so much for coming along this tempeh making journey with me, and now I want to hear from you. Tell me what some of your favorite beans, grains, nuts, etc. are to make tempeh out of, or what you'd be interested in trying. Additionally, I would love to know what your favorite recipes to make with finished tempeh are. I'm always looking for more ways to enjoy a delicious tempeh. As always, if you liked this video, if you could give it a thumbs up, that would be great. And if you want to see the next time we publish, make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on. Bye-bye. This is what it looks like from behind the stove when I'm filming. And he can do tricks, buddy. Sit. You want to sit pretty? Oh, that's good. Enjoy your tempeh, buddy.